Hello, public opinion aficionados, and welcome to Rasmussen Reports, the independent pollster who seems to be the only one concerned about civil war in America. Because, try as I might, I really can't find anybody else talking about this topic. If you're a public opinion professional, you know that things are not healthy in this country right now. And as we approach this election, which is pretty much the most politically divisive one in recent history, there is a lot of concern about what might happen in the next 2 weeks and how it may affect the future of this country. And that's what we're going to get into today because I have some new numbers that are really, quite frankly, horrifying. And like always, hang around to the end of the video for a quick take on the state of the race. And I'll tell you what, even since yesterday, a lot has changed. But here are the crosstabs, and people who have been following us have noticed that we did recently ask these questions in the swing state, but these are now national numbers. And the Democrat Party is now, according to US likely voters, the biggest enemy America currently faces. It used to be China, but now the Democrats took the number one spot. China follows Democrats at 20%. The Republican Party is third at 16%. And very few people, considering we're in a proxy war with them, think that Russia is our biggest enemy. Only 12% say Russia. Now, 18 to 39-year-olds are most likely to say Russia, but they still say the Democrat Party number one. And Russia and China are basically tied. Isn't that crazy, though? We are in a proxy war with Russia. We are funding military equipment to help Ukraine literally kill Russians. And yet China, according to voters, is a bigger enemy. That's wild. Now, the race numbers aren't that interesting, but let's go to the party numbers. And according to Democrats, a pretty big number of Democrats say the Democrat Party. That's kind of wild. But according to them, Republicans are the biggest enemy, 26%. So Democrat Party is literally the second biggest enemy, according to Democrats. That's wild. Followed by China. This is different. It used to be Russia. So I don't know what's happening within the Democrat mentality, but Democrats are most interested in domestic extremists, 12%, higher than anybody else. And if you add Republican Party and domestic extremists, they're most likely thinking about like Proud Boys and stuff. It gets you up to 38%, which is still not quite as high as the 42% of Republicans who think the Democrat Party is America's biggest enemy. Nearly half of Republicans think the opposition party is America's biggest enemy. And then that's followed by 21%. So a combined total of 63% of Republicans say China or Democrats, and only 7% say Russia. But independents say the Democrat Party too, 28%, followed by China. Wild. But here's why I tell people that party doesn't matter as much anymore. Often, the biggest signal in the crosstabs is Biden approval, but we actually have 2024 vote in here. And according to Kamala Harris voters, the Republican Party is America's biggest enemy, 32%, followed by Russia and domestic extremists at 17%. So basically half of Kamala Harris voters are worried about MAGAs or the Republican Party. But Donald Trump voters say the Democrat Party by almost half, again, 46%, followed by China. So that's 70% combined, a really strong signal. But how likely is it that America will experience another civil war or revolution in the next few years? And 43% of voters now say it's at least somewhat likely, 15% very likely, and only 14% say not at all likely. And just like in the swing states, quite sadly, it is 18 to 39-year-olds, the ones who are most likely to have to fight in that war, who by a majority say it's at least somewhat likely, and 22% of them say very likely. And Democrats and Republicans are kind of within spitting distance. Democrats, it's 43%. Republicans, it's actually a majority. Half of Republicans, a majority of Republicans say it's at least somewhat likely there's going to be civil war or revolution in the next few years. Although fewer independents say the same thing as Republicans and Democrats. But yeah, let's go out to 2024 vote. And Harris voters, it's only 40% of them who think it's at least somewhat likely, but Trump voters, it's 47%. Not as big of a signal as I thought. But this is crazy. According to who voters say America's biggest enemy currently is, people who say the Democrat Party are by far, more than anyone else in the crosstabs, most likely to say a civil war or revolution is coming in the next few years. It's 60% of them, and 25% of them say very likely. Only 28% say not likely. Totally different when you're talking about people who say Republican Party is the biggest enemy. 43% of them say likely, again, compared to 60%. Really big difference, showing, in my opinion, that the reaction to the leftism that has taken over the Democrat Party and wound its way through all of our organizations is what people perceive will start the next civil war. Now, let's talk about history as well. I will say that this question had a higher response in the battleground states. I think it was 46%, nearly half, among voters in the battlegrounds in September. I think I saw 47% in Pennsylvania, but don't quote me on that. But what is fascinating is the history on this. And we asked, and you can judge for yourself if you think a change in the wording caused it. But this is before the 2020 election, conducted in June, when everybody was campaigning. This would have been the summer of love, though, too. How likely is it the United States will experience a second civil war sometime in the next 5 years? So this said 5 years, which in my opinion is looser than few years and should probably drive the numbers up. But we also don't say revolution. But at any rate, only 9% of voters said it's very likely, and a combined 34% said at least somewhat likely. So clearly there is something about the 2020 election and Joe Biden's administration that massively increased people's opinions on the likelihood of civil war in this country. Say that again and think about Joe Biden's legacy. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest things that he did to this country: increase the risk of civil war. Now, from here on out, why it happened is all conjecture. Was it the big steal? Was it January 6th? Was it Bidenomics and the absolute crushing inflation and debt we see ourselves in? Is it the way that Joe Biden caused what most voters say is an invasion of the southern border? Is it the undemocratic way in which his successor candidate was selected? Is it the way in which the news media is corrupted to the point where 60% of people think the media is the enemy of the people, and 64% think that political news is being tainted by intel agencies? Seriously, that's where we're at right now. And anybody who worries about the future of our country should very reasonably be asking questions about this. You're not going to see these numbers in the news, though. I'll tell you that right now. But wait, there's more. And these numbers are not released yet, so we're not going to go super deep into the crosstabs, and our managing editor is going to yell at me. But here's a little peek. Does the way most news media report about politics tend to make America more united or divided? This is a very strong and horrifying signal. 79% say more divided, only 10% say more united. And Republicans and Democrats basically agree here, but independents, who have basically tapped out of the party system, are the most likely to say more divided and less likely to say more united. Pretty crazy. But how likely is it that there will be a violent reaction after the election if Kamala Harris is elected president? And these were literally asked like up until last night. This is very fresh data. The election's 2 weeks away. And people think if Kamala Harris is elected president by a majority, 51%, that it's at least somewhat likely there will be a violent reaction. 26% say very likely, only 15% say not at all likely. But if Donald Trump is elected, 47%, 4 points fewer, say that it's at least somewhat likely there will be a violent reaction, and 3 points less people say very likely. Now, you could focus on the 4-point edge that Kamala Harris has there and say that, well, maybe that's the signal here. But the signal is, regardless of the candidates, regardless of the outcome, roughly half of people in this country think that in 2 weeks, we're going to see a violent reaction to the outcome of this election. Democrats are way more likely to think a violent reaction is coming if Kamala Harris is elected. It's 64% of them, 36% very likely. Then Republicans say it would be likely if Trump is elected. 53%, 27% say very likely. And as we all know, if you've been following this channel, that's because of the disgusting political weaponization and radicalization of Democrats through Democrat media mouthpieces like MSNBC. They are upping the rhetoric here and have convinced nearly half of their viewers that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. That's on them. So I said this on War Room, and I'll say it again here. This is an appeal to election workers, secretaries of state, people volunteering at the polls in swing states. I don't care who wins. I don't care who wins. I know you think that it's totally fine to count the votes for 3 or 4 days. I know you think it's totally fine to just say at the last minute, well, look at all those crazy ballots that showed up. And despite the polling, this candidate won or this candidate won. But everybody in this country, by a 2-to-1 margin, thinks that votes should be counted basically the night of election day. And that people who are trying to extend the voting period are just trying to make it easier to cheat. My advice to you is count those votes fast and make this a clean election because things are not healthy right now. And it seems like we're the only ones interested in telling the truth about the state of our country right now. But like I said, we'll update the state of the race. I don't have the chart up yet. Last night's result was a tie for the overnight results. It's a smaller sample than we've been having, 750 instead of over 1,000. But the 4-day rolling crosstab still came out at a Trump +2, believe it or not. So again, time after time, Trump is roughly winning the national popular vote by 2 points, even though the Real Clear Politics aggregate doesn't show it because of all the left-leaning polls. But remember, Hillary Clinton was leading by 6 points in the polls 8 years ago. She only won by like 2. Joe Biden was winning by 8 points in the polls 4 years ago. He won by about 4 points less than that. Seriously, there's going to be a leftward polling miss. And look at this. Donald Trump's just stunning momentum. I've not seen this in my numbers because Donald Trump has always been winning. But it looks like as these people put in their final calls 2 weeks early or massively shift their numbers back to the right, everybody's coming to where I am. But let's go through. This is what's new. A week ago, if you looked at the individual battleground states on the Real Clear Politics aggregate, the best that people could say, even though Trump had turned all of them red, is that the race is really close because all of them were under 1 point. But let's just run through them quick and see where they're all at. Understanding that in previous cycles, let's just look at 2020 in Arizona. Oh, look at that. Donald Trump closed in the final week of the election. But in 2024, Donald Trump is now winning Arizona by 1.8 in the Real Clear Politics aggregate that includes all the left-wing media pollsters. Donald Trump is winning by 0.7. He just flipped Nevada last week. In Nevada, Donald Trump is winning Wisconsin by 0.4. This is the one that's, I think, most uncertain, where there's the most fog of war. Michigan, Donald Trump is now above a point. He's winning by 1.2. Let's just look at last cycle. Oh, look at that. Donald Trump closed very rapidly in the last week. We're seeing the same pattern over and over again. Ostensibly, that hasn't happened yet. There might be, look, we got a whole nother 2 weeks. Donald Trump might run away with all of these battleground states like he's doing in Pennsylvania, which was a tie and is now Trump plus 0.8. Locked neck and neck still, but look at 4 years ago. Look at that late race Trump momentum. And the aggregate wound up being pretty accurate there in the end. So I think we're going to see, again, Trump pulling even farther ahead in Pennsylvania. North Carolina, more fog of war here. A lot of it's because I don't think we have a lot of good polling out of here. But look, like roughly locked in at about a Trump +1 advantage. But yeah, let's look at 4 years ago. Look at that. Trump closed it right at the end. And 8 years ago, wow, look at that. Hillary Clinton was massively up at this point in the race and then was massively down. And then North Carolina went to Trump by a pretty strong margin. Pretty crazy pattern we're seeing over and over again. Here is Georgia. Wow. Georgia is off the table, folks. The left wing Atlanta Journal Constitution called the race at a Trump +4, and the aggregate is 2.5. Trump is starting to open up massively in Georgia, makes it look like she's not going to be able to win it there. And again, massive late race momentum for Trump in 2020. And I'm guessing in 20. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at that. Donald Trump runs away with it at the end. We're in this like period here. So state after state after state is going more and more to Trump. Is it real momentum? Is it just fake pollsters finally trying to be right? Or is it what they call a preference cascade? I don't know, but we still have 2 weeks to figure it out. 2 weeks in which pretty much every Democrat in this country is going to have to come to the realization that the polling shows a pretty solid Trump win. The betting markets show an ever increasing Trump win, including a comfortable lead now in every swing state. Nate Silver shows a Trump win. 538 left wing propaganda even shows a Trump win. Every single betting market, it's not just poly market. There are powerful interests that want to see Donald Trump lose this thing. They only have 2 weeks and they need something big. They do not have the polling coverage, in my opinion, to pull off the same level of electioneering that they did in 2020. People are watching. People are concerned. People are mad about what happened. People are mad that they've been lied to for 4 years about the most safe and secure election. Raffensperger, your state, the polling that includes all of the lefties shows Trump winning by 2.5 points. So I don't know. Maybe something really big will happen between now and Election Day, or maybe we're just going to see more of this slow motion train wreck. I think next up will be a lot of Democrats throwing each other under the bus, and maybe even Biden coming out and rubbing everybody's nose in the dirt, because quite frankly, at this point, with how she's been performing, I think there really is a solid case for him to make that he would have been better. He certainly would have been doing better in Pennsylvania. I think that's for sure. So what a fascinating election cycle. I hope you learned something. And if you liked the video, make sure you click the like button and subscribe on YouTube or Rumble. It helps make sure that other people see our honest polling news. There's not a lot of it out there. Follow us on Twitter at Rasmussen_poll or me at Mark_R_Mitchell. And thanks for watching.